podcast. We are here with your hosts, Dave Reed, Ryan Wilkinson, and Joey Gallo.
Welcome into the NSFW Dynasty podcast. We are your hosts, Dave Reed, Ryan Wilkinson, and Joey Gallo for episode 30. We did it! How do you guys feel?
30, big milestone. Do you think we'd get here, Dave?
Honestly, no, man. It's a lot of work to get here, man. I respect all the podcasters out there.
Yeah, sure is. But 30 episodes in, still having a lot of fun doing it. So I think that's probably a good sign.
That's right. I mean, I feel a little aged, but I think it's more the fantasy itself than the podcast. But what are we, 10 weeks in now? Can't believe we're like this far into the season.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, really. I was like listening to a podcast where they were like, one of the guys made a comment like, it's all right, we still got a couple more weeks left to go in this season. And I'm like, geez, it's a couple more weeks left. Like it seems like we just started, but yeah, it goes by quick.
Yeah, no, it's crunch time, man. 4 weeks left in the regular fantasy season here before the playoffs. It's time to decide if you're going for it or you're going for some draft picks.
Yeah, and every time I try to make a choice, my team decides to do the opposite, which is driving me nuts. But also, it's we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the pod, but this is also the time where you need to start preparing for the playoffs. So, like, not only are you deciding if you're going to go for it, you got to start being more strategic about making sure you're picking up players that give you that edge, maybe based on schedules or give you that leg up in the competition. So, can't believe we're at this point in the season, man. It's crazy. But with that, first going to jump in. There's still some injuries we got to address, and honestly, there's a lot of impacts here, especially for those contending. So there's a lot of players impacted that were probably on contending teams, but we'll jump right into it and we'll kind of break down our views on how this situation is going to play out. But first, going to jump into the quarterbacks. Got a couple here. Of course, both somewhat directly impact my team, but we got Dak Prescott, who has a torn hamstring, is going to undergo, or I don't know if it's official, but it's most likely he's going to undergo surgery and will end his season. Cooper Rush got to start last week. Trey Lance did get in through a pick. But Cooper Rush is apparently the starter again this week. Don't really understand that move, to be honest, but who knows? Jerry Jones is losing his mind. And then Trevor Lawrence has a significant AC joint injury. It may require season-ending surgery as well, similar to the Anthony Richardson injury from last year. So it's no word if that is going to happen yet. He's missing this week as well, so Mac Jones is going to get his second start. So you're getting some backup quarterbacks, and there's some key wide receivers, obviously, that get impacted by this that we'll dive into a little bit later, but focusing more on the quarterbacks. What's your takeaway here?
Yeah, two big names. I mean, especially in Superflex, those guys are definitely probably starting for teams. So, Trevor Lawrence going down for the season, who would have thought we'd be seeing Mac Jones again? Excited to see if he can do anything relevant. But if it's anything like the Cowboys, I mean, like you said, Cooper Rush came in there and just did not look good at all. So maybe, Dave, there will be a little celebration for you in the future.
I think Trey Lance is going to start eventually. I think they're just holding on to one more week. But Cooper Rush was terrible last year. He had negative fantasy points.
He looked real bad.
I traded for both these guys in a singular trade because I had no quarterbacks. And the combination of them gave me, I think, 1 point between the two of them because I think Mac Jones ended up with like 3 or 4 and Cooper Rush had -2. One thing on Mac Jones I want to say, too, I think I said this in our league because I was following it very closely. After like the first or second drive, he had like a rushing touchdown. He had like 8 points or so, and he finished the game with like 4 or 5 points. So for like 70% of the game, he lost another 3 points. Like it's absolutely crazy. He lost points the rest of the game. It's insane. These guys are terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they are who we thought they were, and
they're worse.
I don't expect too much to change there. Yeah.
And I'm probably starting at least one of them again this week.
Yeah, I mean, between the two, I would still be more confident starting Jones.
I am.
For sure.
But, yeah, I mean, it's maybe an interesting make or break on the Trey Lance kind of running saga where if he can't get on the field in this
Oh, man.
situation,
He's
then
never getting.
yeah, yeah. I think, with him, it's like he's always been super prone to turnovers. So, like, I'm sure, but I don't know. To me, it's I will concede that I think it's likely he does get out there for a start, and when he does, it's going to be a lot of rushes, quarterback rushes. So I think he'll probably end up having some fantasy value before the end of the season at that point. So uh, that's the most likely scenario in my opinion. But as far as like offensive weapons on either of those teams,
Yeah, it's
I'm
tough.
yeah, I'm out on it. Like there was a news break today about the Cowboys have decided that Rico Dowdle is their definitive number one, and I'm like,
That's right.
first of all, the fact that it took until week 12 is
Yeah,
just like
it's
seriously
insane.
mind numbing for that. And second, they're not going to score many points, so that's kind of like a nothing burger.
Yeah, it's a moot point. All the Rico Dowdle truthers are like, "I'm kidding me. This is when we get to celebrate." Is this dumpster fire? But yeah, QB landscape getting uglier out there. So tough to see these key quarterbacks go down, especially in Superflex. As we mentioned, you may be scrambling, and it's going to get ugly. But you know what? You can still survive. You just need a quarterback to get hot. But moving into the running backs, Aaron Jones, he had a rib injury. He left the game. He did come back. Should be able to go this week, but keep an eye on Cam Akers as the backup there. Tank Bigsby had an ankle injury. He was forced out of the game. Still questionable if he plays or so this week. We don't really know the full extent of the injury, but honestly, Etienne and Dearness Johnson, those are the other options. I don't know if I would start either of those guys. Etienne has been horrible, and they're playing the Lions.
Yeah,
I know, Joe, that
they're a
you.
full bench. I have him in. I have ETN in a redraft, and he is firmly planted on the bench, even if Bigsby doesn't play.
Yeah, you cannot make me play ATM at this point. I have him in another place, and I'm like, I don't know. I might play Cordero Patterson over like just anyone else. He's just so bad, and the offense is going to stink. And then Najee Harris, another one, banged up, but played through it. He is a tough guy, and I do expect him to play, but he is not the most explosive of players. And with an ankle injury, if he loses any explosiveness, it's not a good look for production. So keep an eye on Jalen Warren, who is someone who is starting to get more and more action and does have a little bit of juice. And then a positive note, Isaiah Pacheco, designated to return from the IR, likely not playing this week, but the fact that they're even talking about that means that he's probably coming back pretty soon. He has to come back within the next 3 weeks. So the Kareem Hunt ride may maybe not become to a full stop right away. It maybe slows down, but just know that if you're someone who's been riding that and going to playoffs, that you probably shouldn't rely on Hunt going into the playoff hunt there. But what other takeaways you guys got for the running back position?
Yeah, the Pacheco one is an interesting one for me because I feel like there's a lot of dialogue around him in both redraft and dynasty leagues right now. Teams that are in playoff position potentially looking to acquire him. I have him in a keeper redraft league where I'm like debating if I should just hang on to him as a potential keeper for next year rather than dealing him. And I don't know if you're necessarily getting tip top value when there's the possibility that they ease him back in. He's unlikely to play this week. His playoff schedule is tough. I don't think that Kareem Hunt is just going to sit. He's going to like all of a sudden go from like producing and playing pretty well. Then they're going to bring back Pacheco, who is coming back from like a pretty significant injury, and all of a sudden just give him 100% of the carries. I think it's going to be a split for a while. So I don't know exactly how much he contributes down the stretch this year. So I think that's an interesting one right now as we're like, getting to the trade deadline in many leagues, and with him like his possible return kind of coming back, looming. So I'd say of the running backs, that's probably the one that I find to be the most interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely the most significant one. I mean, the other three, thankfully, aren't major injuries. And so, like Dave said, a lot of people have been riding Hunt. And, does that come to an end now? I don't know, but definitely has the most significant fantasy implications for sure.
Yeah, for me, and obviously, I am also a Pacheco share owner in multiple leagues. So maybe I'm coming a little bit biased here. So I just want to put that out there for everything I say. I think it just depends. Like if Pacheco is healthy, I think they do go back to them. They love Pacheco, and we've seen this happen a lot of times where you get an old and busted running back off the bench, off the couch. You sign them and they do really well in that role for a little bit, and then you're like, oh, when the starter comes back, they definitely get split time, and they go right back to the starter a lot. And the Andy Reid and the Chiefs trust Pacheco with everything, and like they got Hunt because he knew the system, but Pacheco is way more explosive than Hunt. I just don't see how, like, if you're a real offense, that you'd want to be splitting up carries between these two guys who provide such different types of output. But if Pacheco's not 100%, like that's the only thing. If they feel like they need to ease him back because of the injury, then I can see Hunt getting more touches. But if Pacheco's healthy, I think he gets the maybe like not a 80% like he was getting, but like 70%. He's still going to get like a lion's share of touches.
Yeah, I agree. If he's healthy, I do think they'll go back to him. I think the only other concern with them is they're undefeated. Do they get to a point where they even want to rest some of these guys? And Pacheco is someone they could potentially rest for the playoffs a little bit. Having Hunt now, they could realistically have the playoffs locked up by week, 15, 16, and not have to play them in the fantasy championship or something like that. So
Yeah, they sacrifice some versions or something because the way they're winning, we'll talk about that
I
in a
know
little bit. But
it's always
Yeah.
close, but somehow they keep
Jesus
winning.
Christ, blocking a game-winning field goal. Come on,
Yeah.
get out of here.
I'm like 30 yards.
It's a chip shot.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving to the wide receivers. Got a couple significant ones here. So one, this is from a couple weeks ago, but we didn't get to talk about it. Chris Olave had I believe it's his 5th documented concussion, and it's second, I believe, on the year. He's been put on the IR. It's still questionable if he returns this year. The Saints are really, really bad. I would be personally shocked if they return this year because the biggest concern is just making sure he doesn't have a third one in the same year. So I think you just like play it safe and make sure that he's healthy going into next year. But definitely tough because he was actually starting to eat a little bit before the injury, and it was a pretty nasty hit. And the Bills wide receivers, Keon Coleman, the rookie, has a wrist injury. He was an early out designation a week ago. He is already ruled out for this week. The timetable is still unclear for him, but big piece of that offense, explosive piece of that offense is missing, which is tough because you also have Amari Cooper, who missed last week as well for the second week in a row with another wrist injury. It was a pretty late scratch last week. So we'll see what happens this week. It's still unclear what the timeline is looking like, but you got to play close attention because then you're kind of left with the only true receiving options. We'll get to one other injury related to the Bills a little bit later, but Shakir and Hollins are really the only pass catchers left outside of like maybe James Cook. But then moving also to some positive outlooks. Nico Collins activated from the IR last week. A lot of people threw him in the starting lineup, which was brutal because it was a later game and last minute inactive, which was kind of unexpected for, I think, many owners and not something you typically see. But with that being said, it seems like he's going to be a go this week. DK Metcalf has missed the last 2 games with an MCL sprain, but he did have a full practice this week, so he should be back this week. Michael Pittman was out last week with a back injury. He's been kind of dealing with this all season. We'll see if he is a go this week. It seems like he's week to week, so something to monitor there. And I will say A.D. Mitchell and Alex Pierce stepped up in his absence, but that was with Joe Flacco quarterback, which again we'll get into a little bit later. But of these wide receivers, who do you guys want to call out?
I guess the Bills one, the Bills ones. It's interesting. These guys both have bum wrists, but hopefully they'll get Cooper back because it would be nice to. I mean, like as a Cooper owner, like he's only played the 1 game since joining the team. Right at this point, I'm pretty sure he's only played that first game.
I think so.
Maybe
Yeah.
a game and a half, something like that.
Yeah. So it'd be nice to see him get back out there. I'm interested to see what happens in Seattle. I feel like JSN kind of had his little, breakout in DK Metcalf's absence. So obviously DK is going to command the number 1 target share in that offense. Interesting to see if JSN can keep his production going. Hopefully Collins actually plays this week. Assuming he will because he should have played last week and apparently didn't. And with Anthony Richardson coming back at quarterback, then every single Colts wide receiver goes back to irrelevancy. So who really cares about Michael Pittman's back, because he doesn't get any catchable targets anyway.
Yeah, and then the only other comment I'll add is Chris Olave. Obviously, fifth concussion is not great. I feel like he's heading down the Tua path, which is not a good path to be heading down. And if you're an owner there, you definitely got to be concerned long term in Dynasty.
I will say, Tua does leading with his head though, so that's
He's not afraid.
He almost got another concussion this past week. He went to tackle the guy. What an idiot! I mean, respect the guy, but come on.
Yeah.
Protect yourself. One thing I will say, Nico Collins coming back. Hopefully that elevates CJ Stroud's stat lines going forward. It seems like Stroud needs Nico in that deep bomb to really be productive. So he's been struggling the past couple months. So it'd be nice to get Nico back for him as well. Moving to tight ends real quick. Sam Laporta has a shoulder sprain. It seems like it shouldn't be a long-term issue, but it is something that could put this week in doubt. So keep an eye on that. Dalton Kincaid, as we were talking about the Bills pass catchers, another one who's also injured. Is a PCL sprain. He came back with a brace, but was clearly hobbled. It's looking very unlikely that he'll play this week, and they have a bye in week 12. So you're likely going to be without a tight end if that's your go-to tight end for the next 2 weeks. And then George Kittle, he had a hamstring issue. He missed Wednesday practice. Doesn't sound like it's going to be a big concern, and he seems like he should be able to go this week. And he's the tight end one of the year, and he's been dominating. I don't think he's had a single week not a top 10 tight end, and I think almost every week it's almost been like a top 5 tight end. So hopefully he can get out there because he's been a huge difference maker. Any final call outs on the injuries, guys?
No, not for me.
All right. Well, Joe, you alluded to it. Anthony Richardson is back, baby. That's right. It's 2-game absence to Joe Flacco. Flacco definitely showed his age a bit. He was definitely a better passer than Richardson, but he was throwing a good amount of picks and the team was not winning. So why not go back to A-Rich? Come on. I need you. Another young quarterback who came back and maybe inspired the Colts to make this move was Bryce Young for the Panthers. He got the job back, I believe, three games ago, but he's won 2 straight now. One against the Giants, obviously, and I believe they're on bye this week, so he's riding a winning streak going into the bye, which is good. So he's looked better. I would not say he looks great, but he didn't look as bad as he had before. It looks competent. So we'll see what goes on there. Maybe he can keep that job. Speaking of the Giants, also on a bye, something to keep an eye on if you've been riding Daniel Jones in the contract. If he gets injured and can't pass a physical in the offseason, his contract for next year becomes fully guaranteed. So the Giants want to keep him healthy so that they can potentially cut him and save a lot of cap space. It's something that happened with, I think, Derek Carr and Russell Wilson over the past couple of years. So they may be moving to DeVito or most likely Drew Lock out of the bye. So just know that you may be losing Daniel Jones soon. Christian McCaffrey came back as well. And then, I'll stop there with Christian McCaffrey coming back. So any of these major takeaways on these storylines here, guys?
Yeah, the one that I tend to want to comment on is the Giants situation, where I think it almost has to be Drew Lock coming out of the bye. Frankly, if it's not Drew Lock coming out of the bye, I'm of the belief as a fan that I would like to see Joe Shane and Brian Dable given a shot to draft their guy at quarterback and stick around. But this is a huge but. If they're dumb enough to put Daniel Jones out there and have him get injured and then fuck things up from the salary cap perspective for next season, just for no other reason than like either they don't want to hurt Daniel's feelings or they're too stubborn to like, everybody's saying we should do this, but we're going to do it anyway. That will piss me off to the point where I think that like that decision alone could be worth enough these guys to lose their jobs, right? Like they've made some poor decisions. I feel like they need to stick his ass on the bench now and then cut him at the end of the season and start over. So the only concern with that, like you said, is that I actually think Drew Lock is more functional, and they might actually stumble into a win or two. So that's unfortunate, but losing to Carolina was nice because if there's any sort of like a tiebreak situation, then the Giants will have the edge. So I think they're in a good position as long as they don't do anything stupid.
Yeah, I care all the sentiments. Joe is another Giants fan.
Yeah. I'll leave the Giants alone. That's for you guys to talk about. But yeah, I mean, CMC came back, immediately caught 6 catches and finished as the RB11 on the week. So I feel like you got to be pretty excited if you've been waiting for his return. And most likely as he ramps up over these next couple of weeks, he should be back to his usual self and right in time for the fantasy playoffs. So let's see how that plays out. And then, Bryce Young making a little bit of a comeback is nice to see, even though his stat lines haven't been great from a fantasy perspective. Just the fact that he's back out there starting games is a huge win if you're a fantasy owner of him, because it was looking pretty bleak there a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, he looked like a 0 in value before. Now
Yeah.
he's got something again, and he's given just enough value to Xavier Leggett and Jalen Coker. Or is it Jalen? I feel like it's Jalen Coker.
Yeah.
To get my parlay to hit last week, so that's all I needed.
It's an interesting point, though. If you have Bryce Young now, you've already seen a little bit of an up and down, and you're an owner. Like, is he someone you try to sell right now while he's got a little more value, or are you still just holding?
I don't know how much value can really juice out yet, so I'd probably hold it a little bit more. I think everyone's still a little skeptical about it, but if he can finish the year and as the starter and he has to win a couple more games too, I think, to save his own job, because if they don't, they're going to have too high of a draft pick to maybe threaten the ability to draft another quarterback. So if you can give value, yes, take it. But I don't see anyone giving more. I don't know, like a third right now. Like, I don't know I would not give
Yeah, I
it
mean, that's
higher
the
than
max.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple other quick hitters to hit there. As we mentioned, Chiefs and Mahomes. They sacrifice virgins to keep winning here. But I do want to say in that same game, Bo Nix is looking very solid as a rookie. So and putting up pretty solid fantasy stat lines. On the other side, though, Darnold looked real bad this past week. You got to question, potentially it's 1 week, but is the magic running out there? So something to keep an eye on there. Caleb Williams, I'm eventually putting the yellow light on. I'm a little concerned on what we're starting to see out of Caleb Williams. He's putting up, honestly, worse stats than Bryce Young. Really gross stat lines. They did just hire Waldron, who was their OC. Got rid of him. He was terrible. He was with the Seahawks last year, and if you heard JSN ever talk about him, you can kind of see the writing on the wall that he was terrible. And yeah, so we got some good quarterbacks and some bad quarterbacks here. So a couple rookies and one guy who's trying to play like everyone expected him to be as a rookie. So what are the takeaways for you, Bo Nix, Darnold, and Caleb here?
Yeah, I do agree that I'm a little concerned about the Darnold magic running out. I just I don't know. It's I think that the offense he can get a little like tunnel vision on Justin Jefferson sometimes, and I mean, not that that's a terrible thing, but it's just I find it to be frustrating. And yeah, I'm hopeful on the Caleb Williams front. I'd be excited to see them show some signs of life from an offensive standpoint this week. I wasn't loving the old rumor mill this week that some of the guys on the offense wanted to see Tyson Bagent in there at quarterback. Like,
oh wow,
I
did not hear that.
First of all, I don't really buy it, because like I just like I can't see any legitimate NFL veteran being like you know we feel like it's Caleb Williams who's weighing this team down, and we want to see Tyson out there. But at the same time, there was a video this past week of Williams getting like sacked, and he was like laying down pretty hard on the ground, and like one of the DBs was like the first one over to like help him up after like a long like 5 or 6 seconds of him just like laying there. So like that was a little like alarming from like a locker room standpoint. So I don't know. I think like things are not particularly good right now in Chicago. And maybe it was like, he did kind of like throw some of the guys on the defense under the bus after like the Hail Mary game. And, like it's just been like not a great situation for the team. I think Eberflus needs to go, and he will go. But we'll see. Like maybe the change at offensive coordinator will do something for this year. I just am not totally sure that like this situation is like exactly worth like fully judging Caleb's future NFL potential on, because one, it seems like he has a little growing up to do, and two, it seems like a fucking just absolute mess in Chicago, and I think that's probably the main reason why he hasn't been performing. But just my take there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's definitely concerning. Like, he hasn't been what you thought he was going to be, especially with all the weapons that they have. You thought he'd be performing a little bit better, but it's interesting you mentioned that Hail Mary play. I feel like a lot of issues did kind of start after that and the way he acted with that. So, who knows what's going on in the locker room, and I don't know, maybe that is affecting some of their play, but
Yeah, I mean, I I feel like this is what all the concerns coming out of USC was, though, is that he thought he was better than everyone. He didn't seem like he cared about the team or the other team. And USC, like anything, if a team lost, he's like, it's not my fault. I'm doing everything I can. And like that lack of accountability, you're not going to get better from it. And like he's playing back your ball, and he can't do those type of things. So all these were the red flags coming out of college, and you're seeing the issues now. So to me, it's like it is a character problem. He has to
Yeah.
change himself, or otherwise he's gonna be a bust. Like he'll never get better unless he starts holding himself more accountable. He has all the talent in the world to do it, and it is ironic. I understand the coaching scheme was the best, but from a personnel standpoint, one of the best personnel standpoints that rookies ever come into. Like how are you this bad? Like
Yeah.
a lot of it is on you. I know Waldron's schemes kind of stink, and Eberflus needs to go, but he's putting up like 100 yards passing a game. He's missing throws. Like that's not on the.
Yeah, there are videos out there of him like just missing throws by like
Missing
10
throws.
yards.
Yeah, like
and that's
horribly missing it.
that's where like the only part of me that was like maybe one of the receivers or maybe somebody said something about wanting him bet, because like there's montages out there of him just like missing like 4, 5, 6, 7 guys by like a wide margin, and they're open, and the throw is just like nowhere near them. So
yeah. So
can't imagine Tyson Bagent is the answer, but
no,
definitely not.
Assuredly not.
I think that's I feel like that's an emotional statement that you're making. But yeah, you're not. Your future cannot be Tyson Bagent. At least you show that. But yeah, it's tough being the 101. It seems like over the past 2 years, it seems like being the 102 is the better quarterback these days. So hopefully the Giants get the second pick. But anyway, moving on to those teams. Let's as we kind of talked about at the beginning of the show, it's that time for contenders to really start deciding, are you a contender, and if you are, got to start making moves and start leveling up for the playoffs, because you want to be in the best position to win, but you also know that the rest of the league is going to be doing the same too. So it does become a little bit of an arms race at this time of year. So with this, we kind of want to break down some players that, if you're a contender, you may be trying to target, and if you're a seller and you happen to have these players on this team, you should be very vocal that they're on your team and make these contenders come to you. So with that said, see if there's any of these targets, guys, that, I don't know, Joe or Rye, if there's any players that you want to throw out that, because you guys are on the fringe right now of contenders. I'm technically in the same record, but I think I'm a facade, if you will. What are some players that you think that you're kind of targeting right now as a contender?
So I do like a couple of the receivers that we have noted here. Sutton, we just talked about Bo Nix, who looks great. Sutton, wide receiver 1. I feel like there's not really a ton of competition for targets there. I feel like he's someone that you could buy and he could be pretty solid, not just this year and for this fantasy playoffs, but would still hold a good amount of value going into next year. So I do like him. And then Shakir on the Bills, we talked about a lot of injuries on that team. He's, one that's still there, and anyone that's at the top of that depth chart is pretty valuable in that offense. So I feel like he's someone that there is some potential risk if all of a sudden Cooper and Coleman and Kincaid are back and healthy, he gets dropped down a little bit and doesn't do much. But right now, looks like could be someone you could buy relatively cheap. And if things stay the way they are, he could help you in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, I think Josh Allen really trusts Shakir too, which is why he seems like a safe option. And kind of what you just mentioned too, right? It's a good call out, especially when you're contender. There's certain players like elite players. Obviously, if you have like a million picks or young players, you can level up. But there's also like trying to find more of the middle of the pack players that could level up and provide additional value that you don't have to break the bank on. And also you're trying to find that right balance of these are players that rebuilders are more willing to part with. So yeah, Cortland Sutton's a great call. It is a little bit older, not viewed as highly. Shakir too. Shakir just seems undervalued in redraft and Dynasty in general. So I agree. I think those are two good calls. What about you, Joe? Any calls?
Yeah, so I like the idea of Jacoby Myers. I think Jacoby Myers is one of those guys who, as you were just saying, like doesn't break the bank to acquire, but he's quietly like um, making, establishing himself as the number one target there, even ahead of Brock Bowers over the last couple weeks. So I think you could do a lot worse than Jacoby Myers. I actually saw him get acquired in a redraft league that I'm in earlier today. Um, I'm gonna mention Romeo Dobbs here too because not in like I saw you we have him on the list in the doc and he's a good name to bring up, but also I just want to get your guys' take. Like, what's your temperature check on the whole Green Bay wide receiver landscape at this point? Because I have Jaden Reed in a couple places and I almost feel like he's in like a weird situation where he's been like kind of underperforming the last several weeks. Like he started the season really hot and just like hasn't really been doing as much since then. So I'm wondering if there might be like a little bit of like an opportunity to snag him right now at like maybe a slight discount, or would you even want to grab him at a discount because you never really know in Green Bay. Like sometimes it's Dobbs that catches touchdowns, and sometimes it's Reed, and other times they're running touchdowns. So it's like a little bit hard to predict who's going to end up with the big games there. Like they also have Dontavian Wicks running around, and Tucker Kraft manages to like catch a bunch of balls and catch touchdowns, here and there as well. So it's a pretty tough offense to predict. So if you wanted to have a share of that offense somewhere, would it still be Reed that you would target, or do you have concerns about maybe the price that, especially in the dynasty, like Reed would command?
I think before we even talk about the playmakers, my comment would be Jordan Love is kind of driving some of that. He's been a little bit up and down. He's had some injuries, missed some games. So if Jordan Love's back and fully healthy and himself, then I definitely would buy Reed. And I do also think Dobbs would be a good buy, and both of them should have a lot of value. It's one of those situations, I know we're going to talk about it, but when your top QB goes down and you have these replacements coming in and they're just not as good, the receivers take a huge hit right off the bat. So it could be a good buying opportunity for some of these Green Bay playmakers if Jordan Love comes back and is himself. But Dave, what do you think?
I think that's a great call because I do think Love has been part of the issue. Even when he's played, he's been hobbled and he hasn't looked as great, and that's had an impact on the pass catchers. I still think Reed is the player in a vacuum I'd want the most, regardless of like not talking about what it takes to acquire them, just like who I think is the number one player there. I think he's the most explosive, and he's very much got that like Debo role in San Francisco. And Debo, we see this all the time. He blows up, but then he goes like weeks where you're a little disappointed, and he just doesn't get the same volume. But then he always bounces back there. So you may fluctuate a little bit more than you typically want out of a wide receiver one. But I think Reed is a pretty special talent there. But Dobbs is someone who just always seems overlooked, and the reason we have him on the talk here is because I feel like he's more attainable because he doesn't have as much flashy upside, but I think he's also super safe, like week in and week out. He's very involved in the offense. He's not always making the flashy plays. He does have like the tendency to get a nice bomb touchdown here or there, but I also think defenses view him more as the secondary receiver, so he's probably usually up against lighter cornerbacks in general, which is probably what opens the field up for him a bit more. So if it came to what it takes to acquire players, more so in Dynasty, I'm probably going to first kick the can on Dobbs assuming that Reed is still going to demand a little bit because I think what Reed is a second year wide receiver, and most teams drafted him in the late rookie draft. So, they kind of like second or third round, people have like that emotional attachment to him. So I still think it's hard to get Reed for like a value. I would definitely check it out, but I think Dobbs you can get for far, far cheaper. And on a consistency standpoint, I think I don't think it's far off. I think the upside's still on the Reed side, but I think like
Yeah.
when you
No, 100%.
things
And just to throw out some numbers, right? The last 3 weeks, again, like take it with a grain of salt because Jordan Love's been like iffy for some of these games, but week 7, week 8, week 9 for Green Bay, Dobbs played 83, 84, 83% of snaps and had 10, 6, and 5 targets, right? That is compared to Jaden Reed, who, hold on, give me 1 second. I just have to toggle back. Played 74, 59, 68% of snaps and had 4, 3, and 6 targets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like it's so that just kind of validates the point that we're trying to make here, which is like, Dobbs is a significantly cheaper player to acquire, and he's on the field more, and he's getting the ball thrown to him more, at least over the last couple games. So there's definitely some opportunity there.
Yeah. Wide receivers are also trickier sometimes in Dynasty in particular because obviously everyone wants the young wide receivers that they're valued so highly in Dynasty.
Yeah.
So obviously if you could look for a little bit older guys, and a couple other names that throw out there is like Calvin Ridley is someone who he's had a rough beginning of the year. He's starting to heat up. We'll get into it a little bit later when we run through strength of schedules and some of these players, but he's got a very nice playoff schedule. So someone I definitely look into and see if you can get at a value there. And then another one is he already blew up a couple times this year is Juwan Jennings. He's great opportunity. Didn't have a lot of draft capital. He did get an extension in the offseason, and he looks great. He looks like the honestly number one wide receiver, like prototypical wide receiver there. But I know, Joe, this is something that you've been kind of looking into as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. If you didn't mention him, I definitely would have. It just kind of feels like he's the perfect example of somebody who's in a good offense and getting targets. And as far as pass catchers go, I mean, McCaffrey coming back might eat into his like upside a hair. And obviously Kittle's the number 1 tight end and Debo's there, but he's on the field a ton and he's going to have big games the rest of the way. And especially in Dynasty, right? Like if you're thinking about potentially acquiring Juwan Jennings, right? Like what you're thinking is like he's going to at a minimum he's going to add me value for this particular stretch run this year. But then beyond that, like they just extended Ayuk. So like, what exactly is his role in the offense moving forward? That's a little bit more of a question mark. So maybe there's an opportunity there to get him just because his near-term value seems a little more secure than his long-term value.
Yeah, and I mean going into this year, like that was kind of the same thought. But Ayuk's also going to be recovering from injury next year. They're going to have a cap space issue with Purdy next year. So, Joe, to your point, I think if like there's a selling team, that is like where most people are thinking. It's like he feels more like a current year asset than a long-term asset. But if you're the contender buying it, also know that it's not like he is only a near-term asset. There is like a path for him to be useful going forward as well. So those to me, like when you're trying to buy, like you're trying to thread that needle. Like you're not going to get like a young asset with crazy long future most likely, but finding someone who can help you this year and still probably help you in the future is also like a nice bonus to get.
Yeah. There's a running back that fits this. A kind of similar profile that I'll mention later because I feel.
Well, let's jump into running backs now because running backs generally I feel like those are easier for rebuilders to kind of trade away because they have shorter lifespans and contenders want them. They have bigger outputs. So this is where I think it's a little bit easier to make those trades. But Joe, why don't you jump in and tell us the running backs you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's a couple that come to mind. One of them is a guy that I've been looking at in a couple leagues, Chase Brown. I think he's got some solid upside in the near term, but like my hesitation towards acquiring him or paying up big to acquire him is there's a ton of uncertainty about what his role will be in the longer term. And frankly, does them adding Khalil Herbert or looking to add even more than just Khalil Herbert? Was it? I think it was Cincinnati that was it them who was working out Leonard Fournette?
Yeah,
I think
they
it
were.
was. Yeah, yeah. So like they're obviously looking to add a little bit more depth at the running back position. But that being said, right? Like Chase Brown had like 11 targets last week or something like that. So was that just a reflection of T. Higgins being out? Like, do you really want to give up like high draft capital to pick up a running back who maybe profiles more of like a change of pace back for the rest of his career, but might smash for the next couple weeks of this season? He's been like a really polarizing guy for me as I've been like thinking about running backs to acquire. So curious where you guys stand on him.
Yeah, I actually tried to acquire him in our league like not too long ago. So I think everyone kind of thinks pretty highly of him. I think that's the only issue is his price has skyrocketed at this point. So if you want to acquire him, you have to give up a good amount. But I do think he is someone that could definitely help a lot and lead you to a championship if he's someone you can like throw in your flex.
Yeah, what is he, a second year player?
Yeah, he's young.
Yeah, that's anyone who like when you're dealing with the teams that drafted the players and it's like still like in the first 2, even 3 years. It's always there's the emotional attachment makes it tougher to pry them away because I feel like because he was probably like a third round pick if I had to guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of running backs that I've been thinking about. We already talked about the Pacheco Hunt dynamic there. Either one of those think good targets. Montgomery, I think, is always just a target. It seems like he's always in the zone all the time. Some teams are always looking to acquire. But I do want to throw out from older guys. Gus Edwards is coming back, and I feel like you can get him really cheap, and he'd be someone like I wouldn't bank on like your like is the only move you make as a contender, but someone I might just like throw in to try and like get his additional depth and see what happens there with the Chargers. Seems like he is starting to get more work. He had a pretty good amount of time, I think like 10 rushes or something this past week. So someone I might try to get, you could get him probably pretty cheap or maybe in a package deal. But also Chuba Hubbard is in a weird spot right now. He just got a big contract extension. Brooks is coming back after the bye. I don't know how the owners of either of these players are feeling right now. If they want to try to cash out before the dynamic of the split happens, so that I would at least have a conversation with that owner and see what it's going to cost you. But I do think some of the Hubbard owners might be like, "Oh, he's the lead back," and I might give him up. But I would at least like reach out to him. I don't know where you guys are feeling on that.
Yeah, Hubbard's been great. It definitely will be interesting to see what happens down the stretch. And it's weird that they gave him, that contract because they had Brooks. But I don't know. It'll be
They also
interesting
have
to
a lot
see.
of money tied into Sanders too.
Yeah, true.
The timing of it is so bizarre.
So bizarre.
I can't like I don't understand who they're bidding against giving him that contract at this point in the season, and like before Brooks has even had a chance to like show something that he's got on the field. I don't know if it's a situation where they must see something in practice or they almost have to. Like they used high draft capital on Brooks. Like
Yes.
I don't know. It's not, to me, that was like a pretty puzzling decision, and it only adds tons of uncertainty to both of these guys for Dynasty, to the point where like I've looked at them on squads like where I'm trying to acquire running back, and I'm just like, you know what? Can't do it.
Yeah,
I just don't want to dip my toes in those waters, because as soon as I trade for Hubbard, just got a contract and he's been playing well. All of a sudden, Brooks is going to come back. He's designated to return from IR. What if he like flashes, and now all of a sudden I got a mess? So
yeah, no, I
I'm personally
agree.
out.
It's tough to buy either one. You can't buy Brooks just with everything going on with Hubbard. You have no idea what's going to really happen. But yeah, similar to kind of what Dave was talking about, I feel like running backs are a little easier because typically in Dynasty, you can just target some of the older running backs. And even if they're having a really good year, people are more willing to sell them because generally, if they're older, they're not going to have too many years left. So, Kamara and James Conner, I feel like, are two that are on that cliff age that people are starting to get worried about, but they could definitely carry you through this year and the playoffs. And James Conner, I think, based on what we had looked at, has the easiest running back schedule for the fantasy playoffs. So he could really help you win a championship. And it's not always a guarantee that these guys hit the cliff and all of a sudden their value goes to zero. We've seen that with Derrick Henry, who a lot of people last year thought was going to hit that cliff, and all of a sudden he's the number one running back this year. So it can work out well.
Is that a little plug for a trade you made last year, Ryan?
I got to throw that in there just because, you got to pat yourself on the back once in a while here.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that his value just continues to hold, and that's also where like people overvalue youth in Dynasty. So this is when you try to take advantage of that. Obviously, Henry is like an anomaly, but
yeah, I mean, look, no one was expecting that from Henry, including us. But it brings up a good point of you can buy some of these older running backs for these fantasy playoffs because people are more willing to part with them, and then it's not like their value just goes to zero next year.
Yeah.
All right, quick game right here. I was thinking about this before the podcast. We're gonna call this game first or more, first round pick or more. So I'm gonna name a bunch of running backs, and you guys tell me if their value is a first round pick or more. Right. So you have to tell me, like, would you look to acquire this player would you pay a first? Do you think it would take more? So first name on the list, James Conner. If you were looking to acquire a running back, would you be willing to trade next year's first round pick to acquire James Conner right now?
Potentially,
if I knew it would be a late first.
Potentially a first, I wouldn't give up more though.
I agree. I would not do more.
If someone was going to trade him straight up for a first, and I was really contending, I'd consider it. But
that's kind of the way I was envisioning the game. Like, you would not give up more, but at first you would.
Yeah. And it has to be like a late. Like, I have to be in a position where like I am pretty good, and this is going to make sure it's a bottom 4 pick in the first round.
Yeah, if you're on the fence, like a 5-5 team, you're not.
It's too risky then.
Yeah. All right, next one, Bucky Irving.
I don't think I would do that.
I'm not giving up a first for him.
No, I'm not giving up a first.
Interesting. I feel like there's more future upside with Bucky Irving that it could almost be worth it.
So that's my thing, though. I feel like he's less likely to win you the championship this year. He probably holds value a little longer, but like Rachaad White has.
Rachaad White's been
great. We keep saying that he stinks, but he's been
the last couple,
pretty good.
1 or 2 weeks. He's had 1 or 2 good weeks.
Yeah. But I'm not buying Bucky Irving hoping to win a championship with him, so I wouldn't give up a first.
I also think when we did the rookie redraft, I also don't think we drafted him in the first round. Like, I just don't think he's worth a first round pick in general. I would do a second and then something else with it, but I don't think I could give up a first for Bucky.
Yeah. All right. Along those same lines, Chase Brown, first or more.
Chase Brown, I would.
I would give up. I think he can help you this year. I don't think Bucky's helping you win this year. I think Chase will help you win this year.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, I've made offers for Chase Brown in several leagues, several dynasty leagues, including ours, and I haven't been willing to go to a first round pick because I don't think that I'm not convinced enough on his long-term outlook where I think I'm like willing to commit a potential high first to acquire him.
Well, that's, I think, partially the difference with, because it sounds like for the Bucky chasing, you're looking at the long term. If I'm contending, I'm more concerned about current year. I'm not giving up a first on any player that doesn't help me more so this year. I don't think Bucky gets you a championship this year. I think Chase can.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, keep going down the list. Aaron Jones.
No?
I'm
not giving up a first.
Yeah,
I also have no faith in Aaron Jones' help at all. Like, I can't. It's too much risk involved in Aaron Jones. Yeah, he could blow up games, help you. It's so much risk for me to give up a first.
Yeah, he's only the running back 16 on the year. It's not like he's having an amazing year where he's going to win you the league.
I have Joe Mixon on this list, but I feel like Joe Mixon is an obvious yes.
I would easily give up a first, and probably a little bit more if it took to get across the day. Because I think he could be like a top 5 option towards the end of the year. I feel like he's that
This year, yeah.
This year.
And maybe next year too.
And yeah, so like he got a contract with them, so I think he's definitely worth the first plus.
Yeah. And last one, and this one's a little interesting to me because it's an offense that I mentioned earlier. There's uncertainty around, and they always try to like committee their backfields. But Josh Jacobs,
Yeah, I think I would give up a first.
I
So
don't think I would.
I lean no on this one for the same reason
I
as
just don't
earlier.
think I would.
I just like I want to like in theory as I'm like out there like testing the waters. I'm like, oh, maybe Jacobs, and then they give like Emmanuel Wilson a shitload of carries, and what the hell's his name?
Marshawn Lloyd.
Marshawn Lloyd. That's right. Is coming back. Is designated to return from IR. I mean, he's probably going to get hurt again.
Come on.
Yeah, but like I don't know. Like I just like
he just gets so much work in the couple games. So 2 of the last 3 games where he didn't, he was like he had just so many yards and was so efficient. And but he was still solid. He's like always at least an RB2, but he has that upside to be more in a good offense. I think he's got value going forward. I'm not giving more than a first right now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think these are like really interesting questions.
Yeah,
especially like running backs tend to be more interesting to talk about because like as I was like thinking about potentially adding a couple wide receivers to the list, but like it's just so hard at wide receiver. Yeah, because like people just value wide receivers differently depending on their age and situation and whatnot.
The thing too is like when I'm thinking about this game too, I'm considering like I'm an actual contender where like I'm not fringe. Like these are going to be late first round picks, and to me that's a little bit different. Like I would give up a late for Josh Jacobs. I would not give up probably a mid to early first at all for Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, but that's a decision you got to make right now. If you're 5-5,
well,
like,
that's what I mean. But if you're like 7-3,
like right now I'm 5-5, and I could use a running back in 2 leagues, 2 dynasty leagues, both 5-5, both need a running back in both, and I'm just like, do I trade this week? Do I trade next week? Do I not trade at all? Do I?
The rest of your roster, is it strong? Was it just bad luck and you can bounce back?
I mean, yeah, that's kind of like the decision you have to make. But like the thing is, right? Like even if it's a strong roster, you make a trade like that and you suffer like 1 or 2 big injuries this week, you have some bad luck, and before you know it, like that's like a top 5 or 6 pick, maybe even higher. That you just traded.
It happens. I've done.
Yeah, it sucks. You never want to be stuck holding the bag. That's why, like in the situation I'm in, like this with these 5-5s, like I'm probably gonna let it play out 1 more week before I make a move because I don't want to be stuck holding the bag and not have my first if it's a top 6.
I'm gonna beat you this weekend. All right, man. I just keep trying to tank and I can't tank. So annoying. Well, yeah. Lastly, I just want to throw out a couple tight ends because we're tight end premium, but tight ends can help. Last year, if you had David Njoku, he definitely helped a lot of people get to the title. He's also should be someone I'd be targeting this year, but I'd also throw out Hunter Henry is a nice cheap option, and Jonas Smith has been very involved, and I don't think should be super expensive to acquire either. But just a couple options that I would throw out there. I don't know if there's any other guys you want to call out.
No, Henry's interesting to me too, because I feel like he gives the impression of someone who's unreliable and trending down, and every time you think that's going to be the case, he gets like 9 targets and catches a touchdown. So I definitely think there's value there, and I'm not just saying that because I have him.
I have him in another league. That's the only reason why I know about it. Yeah,
exactly.
You wouldn't know if you didn't own him.
Yeah.
I do want to call out. So this is a unique situation for a lot of contending teams because obviously, if you had some top tier wide receivers, you probably were doing pretty well. But as we mentioned, there's been some quarterback injuries that have negatively impacted some wide receivers since wide receivers are tied to those quarterbacks. And we've seen in the past with like Jamar Chase with Browning last year, how bad it could be that these players really get tanked. So what are you guys doing with CD Lamb and Brian Thomas Jr. if you're a contender right now, knowing that they're likely without a good quarterback for the rest of the year and their ceilings are at least lowered?
I'll let Joe go first since I'm an owner of one.
I think it's worth it to, if you're a contender, I think it's worth it to kick the tires with a squad that is potentially not a contender and looking to trade or possibly looking to trade you a receiver of similar, maybe slightly lesser value, but who's going to contribute more the rest of this season. Trying to think of some examples. And obviously with Lamb, you'd have to look at like the very, very tippy top of the wide receivers. But like, I don't know. Let's see. Maybe you could get a trade for. Mm,
That's the thing with like Lamb.
yeah.
His value is so high. It's like, what you're going to sell him,
Let's
but
see.
who's
Malik
going to
Neighbors.
buy him?
Malik Neighbors.
That's tough because the
If you're a
quarterback
Lamb
situation
owner
also
and
stinks.
somebody offers you Malik Neighbors for CD Lamb, do you take it?
Probably not. Just because, like,
Even with the Giants having the best playoff schedule for wide receivers?
yeah, they have but like the quarterback situation is just you're making such a huge risk because why are you giving Lamb away? Because the quarterback situation. So then why you're going to take Neighbors back, who also has a bad quarterback? Because the Cowboys, I believe, have a pretty good schedule too. So it's not really the schedule; it's the quarterback situation. So you're just trading one bad situation for another.
Yeah. Lamb's 25. Who else? Let's see. I'm
Yeah,
going.
it's tough to sell them because the long term outlook is still there. So it's like you're selling them to potentially contend this year, but then you're losing all that future value. I don't know. It's tough.
AJ Brown. Would you trade Lamb for AJ Brown?
Yeah, that would make sense. If I guess if you were a rebuilder, I could see you maybe wanting to do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that happening.
Yeah, like I think that like I guess my comment is that sometimes if you're a contender and you have one of these like unfortunate situations befalling you, it's worthwhile to try and look and see if you can make a move like that. That granted, it's not going to work out every time. It's probably like a 50-50 and AJ Brown's always hurt, so you could acquire him and then he could continue to be always hurt. But he's still going to be like a similar value wide receiver as Lamb moving forward. So even if it doesn't work out this year, you're not like completely screwed. And his upside for the rest of the season, he puts you in a significantly better likelihood of winning the championship this year. So there's that. Yeah, that'd be what I would at least kick the tires on that.
You got to go to the standings and go to all the losing teams and
exactly
who they got. It's going to be situational there. And then what about
like Harry's team?
Yeah,
I think they have AJ Brown in our league.
That actually would be,
and they're a big time loser team. So if you had CeeDee Lamb and you were contending, that's actually something that you could.
They did their best. They got unlucky a couple times, but they gave the whole college try. But what about Brian Thomas Jr.? What are you thinking there? Would you be making that move, or like what type of player would you be looking to return there?
I mean, I feel like it's very similar to what Joe was saying. If you're going to give him up, you got to be getting someone that you're really sure is going to help you not only win this year, but still retain a good amount of value after this year, because you're not going to give up someone like that for, just the next few weeks and then, be out that future. So I feel like it's tough to make trades like that because although these players have a QB issue and they're not going to be as valuable the rest of the year, as an owner, you're holding on to that hope of like, yeah, but next year they're going to be right back where they were before the quarterback injury, right? Like if you're a Lamb or a Thomas owner, that's what you're hoping. So
sure, but you also might not have a championship at that point.
It's true. It's true.
Gotta get that title. It's all that matters.
I would look at Thomas as more of like if my team was not contending, I might like try to initiate a trade to acquire him.
I may have done that.
Yeah,
I may have already accepted that, but got rejected. I'll try again.
There's talks happening.
There's still talks happening. I think there's a fit.
But yeah, it's tough. It's
definitely tough. All right. Well, I want to quickly run into each position and just talk about some of this. We alluded to a little bit, but the teams that have a very good playoff schedule and the teams that have bad playoff schedules, and kind of see based on that position if there's any moves that you maybe kick the tires on a target in. One thing I have seen is a lot of at least for quarterbacks and wide receivers, it's on bad teams that have good schedules. It's very unfortunate. So I don't know how much moves you can make, but I'll toss it out there real quick. So jumping out first at the quarterbacks, the teams with the best or the weakest, I should say, strength of schedule going into the final weeks of the year for the playoffs. You got the Tennessee Titans, the New York Giants, the Las Vegas Raiders, Carolina Panthers, throwing up in my mouth right now, Tampa Bay Bucks, and then Denver Broncos, and then finish it up with you got the Cowboys and the Jets, and the Cardinals are pretty solid too to close it out. But then the bottom five, hardest schedules, you got the Buffalo Bills, the Bengals, the 49ers, the Seahawks, and the Lions. So all the strong teams have the tough schedules. But
I was going to say, it's interesting. It's like all the bad teams with the bad quarterbacks have the easiest schedule, and then the best quarterbacks have the toughest schedule, which is kind of crazy.
Are you worried about any because obviously most teams have quarterbacks in those bottom five teams there? Like, are you? I don't think you're pivoting off of Burrow or Josh Allen, but are you nervous at all making other plans?
I feel like Jared Goff is one that if you're relying on him, he's like your QB1. You're a true contender going into the playoffs. Like, yeah, that's definitely concerning. Like, he has by far the hardest schedule.
Bills, Bears,
top defenses,
and 49ers, yeah.
So, if you can flip him for someone of equal value that's got a little bit of an easier schedule and you're a true contender, I feel like it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I would look into maybe I know he's been hot lately, but he did have a down game last week. Is checking out Baker. If you have Goff, maybe trying to make the flip to Baker. I don't know if it'll definitely work, but he's getting Evans back and he's got a pretty nice schedule to close out the year, especially the final 2 weeks with the Cowboys and the Panthers. So that's one I'd look into. Bo Nix, we've already kind of talked about. But yeah, I mean, if you really need, I can give you. I don't know. You got Minshew. If you want to get that, get Minshew, Mac Jones, and Cooper Rush or Trey Lance.
You're not doing it for those guys. I mean, if someone would trade me Baker Mayfield for Jared Goff, I would do that.
Well, I think you have to do something else with Goff. But I would. That might be the combo I'd be looking into.
Yeah. You think you'd have to do something else with Goff for Baker?
See, that's why I would be going after Baker. I feel like he's like undervalued, where people still think of him at that level. But
I'd rather have Baker than Goff personally.
Yeah, me too.
In a dynasty,
yes, they both have big contracts. I think Baker's the better actual quarterback. Goff is great, but they run the ball so much that their offense scores so many points, and he doesn't always put up the points. For
this year though,
Baker's been on fire for 2 years straight.
It's not going to change. They have Gibbs signed through, and they extended Monty. Like that's offense is not changing.
Well, they are going to run, yeah, but like their defense this year is a little bit stronger, and I feel like that's why they end up in these like negative game scripts for the quarterback where they're up by a shitload and
they get Aiden Hutchinson back next year. Like it's going to be even better next year.
I don't know. I mean, look, I think it's I don't know that it's like a guarantee that everybody would feel that they
I would
prefer
first
to have
do a straight swap or play it around. Joe, you're a good point. I would feel out what that person thinks first before just blowing the doors off with a big offer, because maybe you can get Baker and something for Goff. But I don't think Goff has been putting up like monster weeks lately, so I think that'd be a tough sell this year.
I mean, I think even just this conversation has proven that they're like similar value, but people clearly value them differently. So that's where if you can sell Goff for someone like that, maybe it makes sense.
Yeah. The 5 picks last week certainly didn't help. That was
I mean,
it's the one game. Yeah. Sticking with because strength schedule is going to be pretty similar for the wide receivers when it comes to quarterbacks, but running through the wide receivers, you actually got the Giants at number 1 with the easiest schedule, Titans, then the Bears, Raiders, Packers, Jets, Broncos, and then honestly the Chiefs have a pretty decent schedule as well. And then the bottom 5, you're looking at the Saints, which they don't even have wide receivers anyway. The Rams, who that's tough for Puka and Cooper Cup. The Lions, as we already mentioned, the Jags and the Colts. It's all right. Anthony Richardson's not passing the ball.
Yeah.
But
It's really just the Rams that you're worrying about there.
yeah, which is tough because that's actually those are two key wide receivers there.
Yeah.
But
It brings up a good point with Brian Thomas Jr. again, though, of if you do hold on to him, not only did he lose his quarterback, but now he's got a really tough schedule in the playoffs.
yeah,
But I mean, on the flip side of it, some guys we did kind of already talk about too, but Cortland Sutton, having the 7th easiest schedule, I feel like could be a really good buy there again. And then Jacoby Myers with the 4th easiest schedule.
yeah.
So it's interesting that those guys that we
Packers
talked
too
about,
that we mentioned. So take a
have
shot on
easy
any Packer,
schedules.
honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, so Chicago is interesting too because you never there's that little shred of uncertainty with the new offensive coordinator where maybe things just start to click for them. But I don't know. I'm not necessarily banking on it. So I dropped DJ Moore in a redraft this week, and he was immediately picked up, which I figured that he would be. But I have options, and I looked before I dropped him. I looked at his upcoming schedule, and it was a sea of green, and I'm just like, But
it also had been green for it hasn't been red. They had an easy schedule.
So if Chicago can figure it out, there's tons of opportunity there, and you would think Moore stands the chance to benefit the most. But yeah, I would want to see it first. So
yeah. Another couple of, it is funny, a lot of the names that we called all have good schedules. You got Jacoby Myers on the Raiders, and then Ridley on the Titans as well. So could be good value for the playoffs there. And then obviously if you have neighbors, we'll see what happens with the quarterback situation, but it is very juicy.
Yeah, I have a funny feeling that Drew Lock, if they do go to him, which I pray that they will, might actually do some good things for their offense. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, can't be worse. Dan Jones, I think we were talking about live when the game happened. Neighbors got open. There wasn't a player within 7 yards of him. And Dan Jones was just outside the pocket. And there wasn't really even defenders between the two of them. And he overthrew it by 15 yards. I just don't even understand how you do that. And I left and stopped watching the game and took a shower because I was like, I can't believe this is happening right now. But anyway, moving to the running backs. Running backs with the teams with the best running back schedules. And again, just throw this out. This is all coming from the fantasy footballers. They have a cool dashboard. It's all schedule adjusted, so it's based on who you play because obviously some defenses play bad teams, so their stats get popped. This is actually adjusting for who did you play. If you played good teams or bad teams, they adjust what the expectation should be. But for running backs, the best schedules we have in the playoffs, we've got the Arizona Cardinals, Tampa Bay Bucks, New York Jets, the Falcons, the Lions, the Raiders, the Jags. They don't matter. The running backs stink. And then the Saints. And then for the bottom 5, we are looking at the Broncos, the Bears, the Texans, the Browns, and the Steelers. So again, I know we talked about Joe Mixon. It's still, I'm okay with Joe Mixon, even though it's a tough schedule because I think he'll catch and passes. But you do got some, the Steelers have a couple running backs there, but there is some juicy matchups from pretty dominant running games on the top. With the big calls that you guys are looking at. We just talked about the Lions. It seems like they're going to eat at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, the Lions and the Falcons, Bijan. Bijan is quietly dominating right now, and you kind of.
Yeah, we just talked about James Conner too, who literally has the easiest schedule.
And even the Jets too. I know Brees has been a bit of a disappointment. He's been more running back too on the year, and honestly, there's a lot of green leading up to the playoffs too. So hopefully you get going. But also, in case anything happens, just Braylon Allen is someone that maybe if you're a Brees owner or you just try to grab, hopefully on the cheap. I know he's a rookie, but that schedule is juicy.
Yeah. And my man Bucky Irving. You know what I will say for Tampa Bay? With Tampa Bay having such a favorable schedule for a running back, if one of those two guys does happen to get hurt, which we saw Rashad White miss a couple games earlier in the season, and Bucky kind of was pretty dominant. So if one of those two guys gets hurt, then the other will absolutely dominate.
Yeah. The one thing to keep called for the Bucs though is their first week of the playoffs is pretty tough. They're playing the Chargers, who are the 4th toughest against running backs. But then it's like a cakewalk after that. So if you get beyond that, it's like you're golden. You're playing the Cowboys and the Panthers.
Yeah.
And then quickly run into the tight end position. Best schedules here. You got the Titans, the Vikings, Hawkinson, just saying. Cardinals, Saints, Giants, Seahawks, and then Jets, and obviously the Raiders too, just to give Brock Bowers a look. And, Packers coming at the end just because I know Tucker Kraft's been getting some hype as well. And then the worst schedules, you got the Colts, the Rams, the Bengals, the Bills, and the Dolphins there. So any major takeaways for you? Oof, the Dolphins are brutal. They got 6-8-2. Toughest matchups there. But yeah, I'm just saying Hawkinson and Trey McBride they're gonna eat this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely looking good for both those guys.
Yeah, it feels like it's looking good for Kyler.
The Cardinals,
the running backs, the tight ends, pretty much everybody that the Cardinals are playing in the playoffs are not good.
Not even the playoffs. From week 12 on, they play all doo-doo defenses. So
and they're a very sneaky good team.
They're tops of their division right now, aren't they?
Yeah, they're like very.
The defense doesn't make sense why it's so good because
it's good. Yeah, and they played like a gauntlet of a schedule earlier in the season. So
no, they have it set up nicely to like make the playoffs pretty easily.
I mean, like look at this: Bills, Rams, Lions, Redskins, Niners, Packers. That was their first 6 weeks of the season, which is like pretty tough. And so to get through that and be number one in the division, that's not a small feat.
They're on bye, and then they get the Seahawks, the Vikings, the Seahawks, the Pats, the Panthers, and the Rams. And then they have 49ers in week 18, but we don't care about that. That's real football. All right, well, some takeaways. Hopefully, if you're a contender, this helps you out when it comes to identifying the type of moves that you should be making. And if you are a rebuilder, be proactive. Find those contenders, float these players out there, make them know that they're available.
Yeah, that's definitely the most important tip is that, like, just because you're not contending doesn't mean that you don't want to be active. If you let this part of the season come and go without making any moves, and you're also rebuilding, like you're kind of just wasting a good opportunity to make your team better.
Yeah, this is one of the busiest times in Dynasty, honestly. This is when everyone's talking, trying to make moves. And yeah, I mean, you gotta put that little lure out there for those contenders to come after. Gotta go fishing, man. All right, well, Joe, jump into the next segment.
Yeah, so it's time to get into the kitchen. We haven't been in the kitchen in a while, but the chefs are pretty hot. Chef Dave specifically has been killing it with the same game parlays lately. He's got a couple good, tasty options to give out for you guys for this week. So yeah, I think we'll just jump right into the kitchen. But first, I'm just gonna throw our usual plug out there. We're gonna keep it short and sweet this week. Go to signupexpert.com/NSFW, sign up for new sports books, deposit money, get bonuses, and make some profits.
Not guaranteed, but
not guaranteed profits. But you gotta be in it to win it. So just
but the potential.
Get in it, and if you're gonna get in it, then you got to get some new user sign up bonuses, right? I mean, definitely, like signing up for a new sports book. The whole like reason you do that is, one, to give yourself more opportunity to better line shop, and two, to get a bonus. So as soon as I like enter a new state, I'm immediately like, oh, let's see what kind of new sports books we have here, and I do that by going to signupexpert.com/NSFW. So I'd encourage you all to do that because it's fun, and you might win, you might lose, but either way, you'll have fun.
Yeah, so. And I also want to just quickly throw out, it's nice that they have the website now because in the past, I remember I'd have to be walking through a casino, and I usually ignore people, but Joe, I'll be with you if I'm at a casino typically, and they'd be like, oh, sign up for the sport book, get a bonus. And he's like, oh, bro, have you done this yet? You need to sign up for it. It's free money, man. You got to get it. And then just make it. And like, never let me leave the booth until I did it, which was great because it's right. It's free money. But now you can do it from the comfort of your home or your bathroom stall if you want. You can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
It's great. You don't have to interact with people.
While you're taking a poop, just go to NSFW, signupexpert.com/NSFW.
Oh man.
All right, so on to this week's picks. Dave, you know what? I'm gonna let you go second because your picks have been pretty hot lately, and you should have the honors of going last. For mine, I'm gonna just throw out there two that I really like this week. One, I'm gonna throw out Jameson Williams, 50 plus receiving yards. I think his line is 45 and a half. We were taking a look before recording. Some might call that pre-production.
I
And
look forward to it.
50 plus receiving yards plus 110. I think that's a really good opportunity. One, they're playing the Jaguars, who have a terrible defense. Two, they're at home, and their passing offense is more effective at home. Granted, they're probably going to end up getting off to a big lead. They're 14-point favorites, and it's probably going to be a game where the running backs get a lot of action. I think that with Sam Laporta looking to potentially be out, he hasn't practiced yet this week, Wednesday or Thursday. So I personally am anticipating he's going to be out. Obviously, monitor the injury report and see if he's active. So yeah, plus 50 plus yards, plus 110, 75 plus yards, plus 320. I think those are both interesting, and I'll probably put a unit on 50 plus and half a unit on 75 plus and hope that they both come in for a nice, 2.5 unit win. And then I also just want to throw out there, I know we're generally focused on props in this section, but the Cleveland Browns, Jameis Winston making his long-awaited return to the New Orleans Superdome. I just feel like this is a great opportunity to bet on the Browns. I really like what I've seen. They're actually dogs in this game. I think they have the better defense. I think they have the better offense. So I love the Browns. So I will be plus 1.5 money line, whatever you're interested in. I think the Browns are a good bet this weekend in Jameis' return to New Orleans.
I actually love that too. And our confidence pool, Joe, that we're in, they're one of my highest ones.
Island? Okay.
Yeah, because I love them.
Yeah.
I think the line is skewed by the win that the Saints just had, which was, I think, under the new coach. I think that was the facade, and it's kind of messing up the line there. I think the Browns stopped the Saints out.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, let's get back in the win column, boys.
Yeah.
Dave, what do you got?
And then for me, I got two parlays for you. One with a little bit more upside, and then another one that I feel a little bit more confident in, but it's not as juicy. So, I want to give you like a nice, hearty meal first. So like the first one is I'm targeting the Falcons and the Broncos. 4 pieces this parlay. I'm going with Bo Nix over 27.5 rush yards. He's had a nice rushing baseline in most of his games anyway. The last week was, I feel like, was a down game, but in general, I think he'll get back this game. The Falcons' defense isn't overly strong or too scary, so I think Bo Nix rushing should be solid there. Audric Estime is the new lead back in for Denver, and I feel like his line's only going to start going up more as once you start seeing his utilization go up. So I feel like this is one of the times you can get in before the lines start going up too high, and his line is at 57.5. Which feels pretty good. I could see him easily getting into the 60s in this game. So I'm going to throw him in. Cortland Sutton, we talked a lot about earlier in the pod. Again, the Falcons defense isn't too scary, and his line is at 53.5 receiving yards. And he seems to be getting a solid amount of usage, and he gets some pretty downfield targets. So I like that line for him as well on the over. And then finally, Bijan over 3.5 receptions. He usually gets around 4 or so targets a game, but the Broncos, because their secondary is so strong, usually the quarterbacks want to start targeting the running backs because that they're blanketed. I'm actually probably going to be taking Bijan receptions laddered maybe just because I think he's going to get a ton there. And if you actually look last week, Kareem Hunt, I think had like 10 targets and 7 receptions. So against the same defense, so I think Bijan's going to eat there on the reception side. Parlay all those together, mix them together, cook it at 350, and you get a nice parlay at plus 900 there. So nice 9-1 parlay for you. And then the next one, I feel a lot of confidence. These are all correlated, so this is why the odds are not as high on this 3-legged parlay. But it's the Ravens-Steelers game. The Ravens secondary is very bad. If you played against Burrow or Jamar Chase last week, you are very aware of how bad the Ravens secondary is. They're one of the best defenses to go against for your quarterbacks and your wide receivers. And Russ has been cooking he's also in the kitchen here. And George Pickens has actually quietly been pretty solid too, and he's the type of receiver who I think can exploit that defense. So all my bets are going to correlate around this. So Russ Wilson at over 226.5 pass yards. I feel like that should be easy. I do think the Ravens score points, so I think the Steelers have to move the ball down the field. So I do think that he will be passing a decent amount, even though the Steelers defense is solid. I think Russ should exceed this total there of 226.5. I'm also going to take Russ Wilson over 1.5 passing touchdowns. That's actually plus money of plus 115 right now in DK. Because again, I think they will have to throw a decent amount there. And then George Pickens, I'm taking him at over 69.5. I think if you actually do in the same game parlay on DK, if you do the over 70 or like at 70 or above, you save a couple cents there. So just like look at those two lines and see which one's the better one. But when you combine all three of those together, you get plus 320, so a little over 3-1. For all these are correlated. I think they're all related to this game script and the matchup. So I feel very confident on that play.
Yeah, I like them both. Honestly, the 9-1, it's that's pretty nice. Pretty nice for a 9-1.
I like that one too.
Yeah.
We talked about the guys a lot. I feel like, they're on the up.
Let's get it done, boys. Yeah, and then real quick, house cleaning in our league. I want to just give some props to the weekly highs that we had. So we'll say we missed last week, so I want to just throw that out. So 2 weeks ago, Clark Sauce took the top score with 184.5, which actually was the highest score on the year. So giving them their flowers for the day. And Canales actually came in at the lowest with a score of, it was 90. I hit the wrong key. 93.24. That's a respectable low score. So that was 2 weeks ago, but Clark Sauce are in the pole position right now. And then last week, Joey Gallo had a very strong showing with the top score of 165.5. And the first time, I think, potentially ever, Mike Caffer and Mike Williams were the low scorer in our league. And I'm talking going back to last year. I don't know if they've actually been here before. With 77.08 points. Still not the lowest score in the year, but in an unfamiliar place for this team. But Clark Sauce still holding pole position, but props to Joe for getting that high score last week.
What's the lowest score on the season?
Lowest score is Canelos with a score of 64.52. And we got
it's getting close to the end
weeks
here.
left, man.
Yeah.
Although,
I feel like Clark Sauce that's pretty solid.
It's just the regular season, not playoffs?
Just regular season.
Just the regular season.
Yes.
All right, let's see if there's some moves that are made to further nerf some of these teams, because that will be definitely the key aspect in whether or not somebody comes in lower than that.
I know. That's one of the hesitations I have, and that's also why I made the trade for those two quarterbacks. I was like, I just need to make sure I can't have no quarterbacks here. No points.
Almost made it worse for you, though.
I know. Seriously. I gained 2 points. Brutal. But yeah, with that, any other takeaways or things you want to call out, guys?
No, I think we're in a core piece of the season. Go make those trades if you're contending or if you're selling.
All right. Final stretch, boys. Good luck to everyone going into week 11. And if your trade deadlines are coming up, make the most of them.
Episode of the NSFW Dynasty podcast. Tune in next time